The headline said the quiet part loud. On October 30th, 2025, President Donald Trump declared that he had instructed the Pentagon to restart nuclear testing on an equal basis, instantly raising a question the United States hasn't faced in a generation. Are mushroom clouds really coming back? Officials tried to calm it down, saying the immediate focus is subcritical experiments, not full explosions. But the signal landed in the middle of a fragile arms control moment, with Russia walking away from test ban commitments and New START entering its final months. Tonight we sort the facts from the noise. What was announced, what's technically possible, and what it would mean for you. And we'll show where the politics ends and the policy begins. Three realities frame this story. First, the United States has not set off a nuclear explosive since September 23rd, 1992, when a test code-named Divider closed the Cold War chapter at the Nevada test site. Since then, the arsenal has been certified through computer models, high-energy lasers, and underground subcritical experiments that use small amounts of plutonium but stop short of a self-sustaining chain reaction. These activities are legal under U.S. policy and do not produce a mushroom cloud. Second, the legal backdrop is complicated. Washington signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1996 but never ratified it, so the treaty has never entered into force. A global political norm against explosive testing did form, yet it weakened when Russia revoked its ratification in 2023 and hinted it could mirror any U.S. move. Third, the timing intersects with arms control. The last remaining U.S.-Russia limits, New START, are scheduled to expire on February 5th, 2026, and compliance is already strained as inspections and data exchanges have been curtailed. Against this backdrop, any suggestion of resuming testing can mean very different things. A ramp-up of diagnostics and subcritical work at the Nevada National Security Site, or a far more consequential decision to detonate an actual device. One is a routine, if politically charged, extension of current practice. The other would mark a break with 30-plus years of restraint and trigger reactions from allies, rivals, and Congress. The White House is signaling a tougher posture without crossing the line into detonating a bomb. The public announcement sounded sweeping, restart testing, but subsequent briefings emphasized non-explosive work already permitted under U.S. policy, like subcritical experiments and higher fidelity diagnostics to analyze how aging warheads behave. That nuance matters. Explosive testing would require political buy-in, technical reconfiguration, environmental review, and months, more likely years, of preparation. At the same time, the administration is pairing the message with talk of maintaining limits on deployed strategic weapons as New START nears its February 5th, 2026 expiration. In other words, deterrence signaling and bargaining leverage are moving in parallel. Supporters argue this is a prudent hedge against Russian and Chinese advances, and a way to validate the stockpile without telegraphing weakness. Critics warn that even hinting at a return to full testing erodes a global norm, invites reciprocal moves, and complicates any path back to verifiable arms control. If anything ramps up soon, it happens in the desert north of Las Vegas, at the Nevada National Security Site, the successor to the old Nevada test site. The site already conducts subcritical experiments deep underground, where small quantities of nuclear material are compressed and measured without triggering a self-sustaining chain reaction. The work focuses on physics data, how plutonium responds under extreme pressure, how components age, and how modern warhead life extension programs should be tuned. These experiments are instrumented to the millisecond, with high-speed imaging and diagnostics that feed into supercomputer models used by the national laboratories. Moving from that to an actual explosive test is a different animal. Tunnels must be prepared, shafts drilled, containment systems built out, and monitoring networks calibrated. Safety, environmental compliance, and independent oversight would all come into play. along with coordination between the Energy Department's National Nuclear Security Administration and the Pentagon. Even under favorable conditions, assembling the required people, equipment, and approvals would likely take well beyond a political news cycle. That reality is why officials keep underscoring the near-term focus on non-explosive activities. Local and state politics are another break. Nevada leaders have already signaled opposition to any resumption of explosive testing, citing health legacies from the atmospheric era and economic risks to tourism. In Congress, Western delegations are introducing bills aimed at blocking full-yield tests or conditioning funding on explicit authorizations. Those fights could unfold inside the annual defense and energy appropriations process, where schedule pressure often forces compromises, but also leaves a paper trail that watchdog groups will scrutinize. There is, however, room for visible activity short of a detonation. The site can expand underground diagnostics, run more frequent subcritical experiments, and upgrade data gathering gear designed to capture finer details of materials behavior. For the public, that means trucks on highways, construction at remote portals, and periodic announcements of completed experiments, signals that the enterprise is busy, even if no one above ground notices a thing. If this breakdown is helping you separate headlines from hard facts, tap like and subscribe to our channel. We cover national security stories the way they affect real people, budgets, timelines, and trade-offs without the noise. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter as news start runs down and Washington decides how far to push testing. And if you want deeper dives, drop a comment with what you'd like us to unpack next: policy mechanics, Nevada politics, or the technology behind subcritical experiments. Your questions drive what we make next. Abroad, messaging collides with mirror imaging. Moscow has already framed U.S. moves as justification for its own options, having revoked its ratification of the Test Ban Treaty in 2020, and warned it could respond in kind if Washington crosses into explosive tests. Beijing, which is modernizing its arsenal and expanding production capacity, sees any U.S. shift as both a data point about American resolve and an opening to paint Washington as eroding guardrails. Neither capital wants to be boxed in. Both prize strategic ambiguity, which is why carefully parsed U.S. statements matter. Among allies, reassurance runs alongside anxiety. European partners who depend on NATO's nuclear umbrella generally welcome improvements in stockpile confidence, but they worry about fracturing the non-proliferation regime and giving oxygen to domestic anti-nuclear parties. In the Indo-Pacific, Seoul and Tokyo watch for signs that extended deterrence. The promise that U.S. capabilities back their security remains credible without triggering a destabilizing test race. Recent U.S. ROC statements, including cooperation on undersea capabilities, were calibrated to signal commitment while keeping escalation ladders short. Markets and industry notice too. Contractors tied to national lab upgrades and diagnostics could see steady work. Tourism-heavy Nevada fears reputational damage if the word testing dominates headlines. Diplomatically, even non-explosive steps may complicate efforts to rescue structured limits after New START expires, because Russia is likely to demand concessions or parity in activities. Conversely, proponents argue that a visible, data-driven test program short of explosions can strengthen negotiating leverage by reducing doubts about U.S. warhead reliability. The counterpoint is simple but serious. Norms are fragile. The global moratorium on explosive testing has survived on politics, not law, and each rhetorical nudge can chip at its foundation. If one state conducts a test, others may follow, and verification hurdles multiply. That risk sits behind much of the nervous reaction, not only to what Washington does, but to how it talks about what it might do next. From the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which pushed tests underground and ended most atmospheric fallout, to the U.S. moratorium that began in September 1992, American policy has leaned toward restraint while keeping the arsenal viable. The post-Cold War bet was that supercomputers and subcritical experiments could replace live detonations without eroding deterrence. In 1996, Washington signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, but the Senate never ratified it, so the pact never legally entered into force. A global political norm still formed, reinforced by verification sensors that listen for any illicit boom. That norm wobbled in 2023 when Russia revoked its ratification and warned it would mirror any U.S. move. Today's debate rhymes with the 90s. Confidence in the stockpile versus the pull of demonstration and diplomacy trying to fence in technology. Over the next several months, watch 3 tracks moving at once. The technical track lives at the Nevada National Security Site and the National Laboratories, where officials can schedule additional subcritical experiments, upgrade diagnostics, and publish bland-sounding test names that specialists parse for clues. Those steps require money and safety reviews, but they are within existing authorities and could scale without a new law. The political track runs through Congress and Nevada. Appropriations bills and policy riders will test whether lawmakers want to explicitly authorize, prohibit, or simply study any move toward live detonations. Expect hearings, letters, and litigation threats from state and local leaders who remember the downwind legacy of the atmospheric era. The diplomatic track is the quietest, but it matters most. New START reaches its expiration on February 5, 2026, and absent a successor arrangement, both Washington and Moscow can move beyond current limits. European and Indo-Pacific allies will press for clarity. Can the United States keep the stockpile credible, avoid an explosive test, and still negotiate verifiable constraints? Verification institutions are part of the answer. The global monitoring network that supports the test ban regime, hundreds of seismic, hydroacoustic, infrasound, and radionuclide stations, would detect any major violation, raising reputational costs even if legal enforcement is thin. A plausible near-term outcome is an assertive but non-explosive program at home, paired with exploratory diplomacy aimed at temporary ceilings or confidence-building steps. The harder path is a leap to a full-yield test, which would bring immediate foreign responses and lock the world into a rougher era. For most people, this story won't change daily life tomorrow, but it shapes the risks and bills you share. If the administration expands non-explosive testing, you may see little beyond occasional headlines and spending lines in federal budgets. If Congress greenlights large construction projects at the Nevada site or at the labs, that spending supports skilled jobs while competing with other priorities. If the policy ever shifted to an explosive test, there would be no return to atmospheric clouds. Modern tests are contained underground, yet they would still carry diplomatic costs, litigation, and a fierce political fight. If you live in the Southwest, expect town halls, environmental reviews, and more cameras on desert roads. If you follow markets, watch contractors tied to diagnostics and data systems. And if you care about arms control, track whether Washington and Moscow find even a narrow bridge before February 2026, because the guardrails you can't see still matter. Thanks for watching this clear-eyed look at what returning to nuclear testing actually means. If this helped, tap like and subscribe to our channel so more people see sourced, plain English explainers on national security choices. Here's the question we're leaving you with. Should the United States stick to non-explosive experiments and pursue temporary limits? Or is there any scenario where an underground detonation makes sense? Before New START expires on February 5th, 2026, tell us where you draw the line and why.